recording in progress. All right.
Yeah, good.
Now I will share my screen. See, I'm getting it. I'm getting it. Here we are. All right. Can everyone see the slides on the side? Big thumbs up. Okay, perfect. All right, Rachel. Welcome. Would you
Thank
mind
you.
just
Sure.
introducing yourself a little bit and telling us about the history of your work a little bit?
Sure. My name's Rachel, and we moved almost 10 years ago from England. And I'm married to a Canadian, and he's a church pastor here. We moved to join a church here in Dallas. And my background's actually in psychology and in education. So that's kind of where all my university years went. But I've always been really creative, and I used to love creating displays of children's work when I was teaching elementary children. Love kind of uplifting their work and creating these really cool displays, and always kind of have some little project on, some little stitching thing going on. And when we were in London, we had our first son. A friend lent me their sewing machine, and I hadn't used a sewing machine before. And I learned this technique called freestyle embroidery, which is where you put the foot of the sewing machine down and use a specific needle, and you kind of move the paper however you want, and the needle then is like a pencil. And so I just became addicted to this kind of technique, and did lots of like boats and different kind of lighthouses and things like that for my son's bedroom when he was born. And then I started creating presents and things for people, and like stitching Bible verses into pillows or little things like that. And then we moved here, and I didn't realize I was an introvert until I had children. And kind of that nap time became my reset time. And so that was kind of my time to create. And as often happens when I was reading scripture, or scripture was being read at church, I would get a picture in my mind of a scene in the everyday life. And then I would start creating that scene with fabrics, often antique fabrics. And so things like "Be still and know that I'm God" was a roll top bath, like a Victorian roll top bath, kind of a place of you can't do anything other than be still in the bath, and kind of just things like that. And oh yeah, that's me. Yay.
I'm gonna just scroll through as
so yeah, this is my studio. So I have a studio on the village. And anyway, so I carried on creating, then COVID hit, and I did an online watercolor class, and I fell in love with watercolor, and then started to stitch on top of watercolor. Did lots of florals. I love leaves, florals, all that kind of thing. And mixed media. So this piece here is some hand embroidery on top of acrylic and watercolor. And I also teach preschool. So I love to bring the joy of preschool to adults in my classes, and kind of help people to play and kind of find their own style of creativity. So art's been my therapy. Art's been my reset, and I now
do you have like a specific routine that you follow when you are art making, or is it more fluid than that?
So I have this studio space, and so this piece here is hand-dyed fabric that I turned into like a weave, like a weaving. I took a piece of a huge canvas and ripped it with a standing knife, and then started to stitch it back together and using different vintage fabrics and hand-dyed fabrics, and then added the gold foil on top. For me, that was like the fingerprints of God over these stitches. Stitching for me is kind of a sign of healing, of kind of making something, bringing something together. And so that actually left the needle in the canvas as a sign of lots left to do, that the process of that healing, of God making all things new, is still ongoing. So in terms of a process, I have this studio, and I teach classes. So, and I also am teaching. So I'm not there full time. So I'm not a full-time artist yet. But I do try and carve out a day every 2 weeks where I just put everything to the side and I play and I try something new. And I get a bit frantic with it, kind of, and then kind of just get these ideas, and then whoosh, off they come. The piece on the right was after the Queen died. We had the photograph is her when she was in Canada, her last trip to Canada, and that's the dress that she wore. And we had the photo in our house, and so when she died, I kind of copied the style of the florals on the dress and created the shape of
Beautiful.
what's on her. I think it's on like a 5p piece. That's the shape on the 5p piece. And then the one on the left is unfinished, and so I often have several pieces on the go, and I kind of just work around sometimes I start to finish, but often I kind of dive into some and then move on and leave and then do something else. I think I'm a bit ADHD, so anytime I get a bit bored, I move on to something else. So, but this one is the strips of paper were an old hymn book that we used at my church growing up, and we would have to sing from that hymn book usually every Sunday evening, and I'd go to church like 4 times on a Sunday, and did not enjoy the experience at all, and saw a lot of hypocrisy in that church, and there was a lot of damage from that season, like spiritual damage, and so I am just slowly slicing these pages of the hymn book, and it's interesting because it smells so familiar. It's like a bit moldy and musty, so it's kind of triggering some deep emotions, and then I'm starting to quill them, to quill the strips, and I've actually put gold foil on the butterfly, and then I'm going to stick the quilling, the paper curls on top of the gold, so you'll see the gold underneath, and then I'll probably brush a bit of gold on the top, but just as a sign of and a prayer that those who were damaged by that situation would become free and would be able to fly. A prayer for myself and a prayer for others, that we went through the same kind of thing.
That's great.
Yeah. So
would you say, I know that you said that, I mean, a lot of your work is narrative coming from your own life. Is there a specific time period or artist that inspires you?
I think the artist's story that I like the most, or I'm inspired by the most, is probably Matisse. And I actually use him in some of my workshops. Just that sense of he started off with one style, then because of illness, he could no longer paint, and therefore he got his studio assistant to paint these big pieces of gouache, and then he got his scissors and created the shapes. And that what he's famous for now is of his cutouts, and rather than his previous work. And I just am so inspired. I love teaching children about Matisse. I did a workshop with some kids going off to college next year, and we were talking about transition and change, and we use the Matisse, his process by making the papers and then using scissors as to process our own transformation and our own change, and predicting the change ahead and things like that. So I think Matisse for me is, I'm reading a book which compares Matisse and Picasso and kind of their rivalry together. It's kind of like a novel book at the moment. I'm reading that, and that's been really interesting. But I think artists in general seem to overuse their creativity to overcome adversity, and I think for me, sometimes it's through stitching and it's through dyeing fabric. So we went through an ectopic pregnancy a few years ago, and we were given all these flowers, and I dyed tons of flowers, tons of fabric, vintage fabric, with the flowers that we've been given, and these gorgeous different colors came out, and then used those fabrics to create pieces, and then kept some of the fabric for the piece that you just saw. And so for me, it's my dinner. Thank you, darling. It's that sense of the process, the meat. So right, I do love watercolor. I love to stitch. Right now I'm kind of doing some quilling. So it's the way I can express kind of what's going on inside, and using a medium to help me do that. Well, yeah.
What would you say if you could give yourself advice, like a younger version of yourself, or just someone, behind a little bit at the start of their journey artistically? What would be the advice that you would give?
Well, I think to learn as much as you can, and so I love doing online classes, and the one I did during COVID was a Laura Horn watercolor class, and she's got great classes, and there's another artist I like, Susan Nethercutt. I love her podcasts and her classes. So I'd say do what get as much kind of wide variety, but pay close attention to that gut feeling, and like that piece where I shredded the paper, the canvas. I just had to do it. I had it and it was like, I remember the woman who wrote A Wrinkle in Time, I forgot her name. She talks about how an artist, it's like a piece comes to an artist and says, would you give birth to me? And she compares that to Mary, when the angel kind of said, you're going to have give birth to Jesus, and she said, so be it. And she compares the artist saying yes to those that gut feeling of I've just got to do it, and I have to give birth to this. And so, and I'm still having to tell myself to do that. And it's the real challenge is making art that sells. And I have a studio, and it's almost like a storefront, and is art that people can afford, to art that is like, I've just got to do this. And that I think there's that tension between the two. So I think that would be my advice, was just make room for the gut, because out of that, comes something extraordinary, and different.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to open it up for maybe 1 or 2 questions if anybody has a question for Rachel before we get started on the feedback.
I have a question.
Go for it. Yeah, go ahead. Lorinda, go ahead.
My screen froze.
Oh,
sorry. My screen froze right when I spoke out loud. I was just wondering about your palette and kind of where that really are very suggestive of the natural world, and I love it. But I just wondered if there are certain places that you turn to, or what inspires you in terms of the colors that you choose to work with.
I think so. I have 3 boys, and I'm a boy mum, and I live in a boy's world, and so I think subconsciously, like, I am drawn to softer colors. I love that kind of dusty pink and the sagey greens. Those are just like, oh, I just love those. So I'm drawn to that, and color causes an emotion, and for often it's working with colors that, so this one here, slightly brighter colors. This was I called this set the joy of spring, and I wanted kind of like expressing the joy of spring, and it's probably a bit more brighter than I would normally go for, but I think colors that calm me is my go-to, just that bring calm, because of the crazy world I live in, with hoverboards and all the rest of it. This piece, do you want to, Andrew, do you want to talk a bit? Shall we talk a bit about the commission, the collaboration we did?
Sure. Let's see if anyone else has a question.
Oh yeah.
Then we'll do that. Any others?
Okay, I have a quick question.
Okay.
Rachel, whereabouts in Canada is your husband from?
So he's from New Brunswick.
Oh, wow.
On the East Coast. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Rachel and we collaborated on a piece last year, and we had these embroidery hoops that we would stitch on and then exchange them like once a month. I think we did this over the course of like 6 to 9 months of exchanging and then stitching. And it was a really fun experiment. We, Rachel, ripped a canvas for me, and then I stitched it back up, and we dyed fabric and tea and stitched over and over again. But the concept was just these 3 tree rings kind of patience, and just how each season might look different, might be imperfect, and but we just keep going, right? And just keep kind of marching on and keep moving through until the thread changes and the season changes. So that was our lovely little piece. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second, because I'm going to stop the recording, and then we will get started on everyone else's work.